When Shakespeare was alive, it may have been Elizabethan England, but even people like Shakespeare had to show up for work. So, what did the daily commute look like if you were living in turn of the 17th century England? Let's find out right now on That Shakespeare Life. Of course, we know that people like William Shakespeare would have had to travel from place to place, whether it was traveling playing companies or it was vendors carrying their wares from their stores to their clients. Lots of different people had to get around town for a variety of reasons. But how did ordinary people get from place to place? In order to find out more about travel in Shakespeare's England and exactly what it looked like to commute to work, I sat down with Dr. Charmian Mansell, whose research uncovers the practical realities of everyday travel in 16th and 17th century England. And here's what she had to say.
Yeah, so we tend to think, I think, of people in Shakespeare's time as fairly sedentary, like life playing out within the village. We even maybe imagine urban footsteps to be maybe quite local. Merchants, I think we might think of as more dynamic, to have left, their footprints all over the place. So their commute was probably not daily. More likely they would travel, let's say, a handful of times a week in their trade. But yes, it could definitely sort of take them quite regularly outside of the places that they lived. One of the things I'm interested in understanding is the movements of people who leave fewer traces in the archives. So people like women, lower sorts, people who are kind of lower down the social ladder. And I mainly get to their experiences through legal documents, because these people generally don't leave us nice diaries or letters that we can look at. So legal documents like court records or witness testimonies can tell us a lot about people that we maybe wouldn't hear from so often. So these are people who are observing a crime or an offence taking place, and they kind of come to testify in court and tell us all kinds of interesting things about their movement. So thinking about your question about merchants, we can think kind of on a smaller scale than that. So I found a man named Thomas Hanwood in the records of the Somerset Quarter Sessions. You'll notice that I'll talk a lot about Somerset in this interview because it's a place I'm working with quite a lot at the moment. And Thomas was what we call a petty chapman. So he was an itinerant dealer, a kind of buyer and seller of all kinds of things. In this particular case, I found him selling calico, which is a sort of type of fabric. And in 1609, he was questioned by Somerset justices of the peace. So these are the sort of, authorities, probably because he was a stranger. So he actually told them a lot, like that he was from Norfolk, that he had been traveling the country, and I quote, for the space of 6 years using the trade of a petty chapman. So he'd come from Norfolk to London, then London into Somerset, because he was drawn to the county by a small fair that was happening in a place called Vinegar in Somerset. So his testimony tells us kind of incredible things about the sort of wide geography to his working pattern. We can also look at maybe, kind of labouring people. So, we have, for example, this really fantastic case where we see the servants of a widow named Joanna King, for instance, who travel 5 times a week between the Somerset village of Compton Dando and the city of Bristol, which is about a kind of journey of maybe 6 miles. And they return with their horses laden with wheat to be ground at their mistress's mill. So lots of people traveling for work, on behalf of others, sometimes short distances, but they're doing this fairly regularly, as I said, sort of 5 times a week in this case.
If you've ever wondered how far someone might travel to buy goods, meet a relative, attend church, or even pursue a court case, this episode explores that entire world. You can hear our entire conversation with Charmian Mansell on our podcast right now at CassidyCash.com/episode 409. And if you're interested in my interpretation of what I think the commute from Stratford-upon-Avon to London might have looked like for William Shakespeare, you can get my Road to London illustrated map. This map maps out the different places between Stratford-upon-Avon and London that I think Shakespeare could have stopped along the way. Most of the places mentioned on this maps are taverns or pubs or inns that actually are mentioned in Shakespeare's plays. You can find out more about the history of each location and where it shows up in Shakespeare's plays all on this download. You can either sign up for our weekly episode newsletter to get this download for free, or you can get it yourself over on our Patreon page. Becoming a member of that Shakespeare Society unlocks an entire library of downloads just like this one. That's it for this week. Thank you for watching. I'm Cassidy Cash, and I hope you learned something new about the Bard. I'll see you next time. Bye bye. If you like walking around in turn of the 17th century England to see the sights, smell the smells, play the games, and maybe even haunt an old theater or two, then this is the place for you. Hit that notification bell so you can be sure to join us on our next adventure. I'll see you in the next episode.